some change makers. Boy, do we have a lineup for you. Welcome all to Earth Gives Power Hour, our third, to dig into actionable ideas that we all can consider. My name is Rhonda Bannard, and I am the founder and executive director of Earth Gives. And inspired by youth climate activists, and upon the discovery that only 2% of giving goes to environmental and climate-focused philanthropy, I knew that something needed to be done. So our signature event is to start the first US-wide Giving Day for environmental and climate-focused nonprofit. It is the only one that is focused on a singular issue. And so that's why we're here today, because these Power Hour programs are part of the 25 Days of Giving, which runs through October 5th. Because investing in all of these amazing organizations that you see here is just part of the solution, but knowledge is a key accessory. So that's why we're here for this Power Hour. It is my great honor to have three representatives of two of the Earth Gives Day participants. The Western Environmental Law Center is our very first nonprofit, so they hold a very special place in our heart because they were the first to sign up. And so we're excited to have two incredible people from there. So please, and of course, Third Act, Mr. McKibben with us. So please welcome our first two VIP guests who were part of the legal team representing 16 Montana youth in an historic case, Barbara Chilcott and Melissa Hornbein. Ladies, thank you, congratulations, and take it away.
Thank you so much, Rhonda and Earth Gives, for inviting us to tonight's event and giving us the opportunity to introduce such a notable speaker. My name is Melissa Hornbein. I'm an attorney with the Western Environmental Law Center. Can everyone hear me? Okay. The Western Environmental Law Center uses the power of the law through both litigation and policy engagement to protect the public lands, wildlife, and communities of the Western U.S. in the face of a changing climate and to respond to overlapping climate and biodiversity crises. My colleague Barbara Chilcott and I are based in Welk's Northern Rockies office in beautiful Helena, Montana, and we recently had the immense privilege of being among the team of attorneys that represented 16 youth plaintiffs who sued the state of Montana for the government's continued promotion and support of a fossil fuel-based energy policy that puts their quality of life and cultural identity, their future well-being, and their state's unique and precious ecosystems at risk. In June of 2023, these young people were part of the first ever youth climate trial to protect their rights under the Montana Constitution to a clean and healthful environment and equal protection of the laws, among other rights. In August, the plaintiffs obtained an order from the judge holding that not only does the state have to inform itself and its citizens about the climate impacts of its energy decisions before it makes those decisions, but also she held that plaintiffs, quote, have a fundamental constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment, which includes climate as part of the environmental life support system. The youth climate movement exemplified by these young plaintiffs and this truly historic judicial decision is mirrored in the work of tonight's speaker and the organization that he helped to found, Third Act. Third Act and its membership supports precisely these types of youth-led movements, amplifying their voices, all while making, in the organization's own words, good trouble of their own. To introduce, if I may be so bold, its troublemaker in chief, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Barbara Chilcott.
Thanks so much, Melissa. And again, Rhonda and Earth Gives, thank you so much for inviting us here tonight. So for tonight, our featured speaker for Power Hour is known for a few things. For one, he's authored a number of books, including his first, The End of Nature, published in 1989, that is known as the first book to make climate change approachable and understandable. He's gone on to write many more books, including his latest, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders, what the hell happened? He has also helped found organizations that turned into global movements, notably 350.org, and he has won a great deal of deserved recognition. In 2014, he was awarded the Right Livelihood Prize, sometimes called the Alternative Nobel in the Swedish Parliament. He's also received the Gandhi Peace Award and honorary degrees from 19 colleges and universities. He serves as the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College in Vermont. More recently, he helped found Third Act, as you heard, a progressive organizing movement for people over 60. Before we hand it over to him, though, I'd like to read some of his wisdom from The New Yorker, where he is a contributing writer. This excerpt is from a piece he wrote just after the climate march. Keeping movements alive is hard work. They run on volunteer energy, and they can be derailed by too much success, too much failure, too much internal strife, too many competing interests. Or they can be hindered by a pandemic, which largely brought the climate movement to a halt just months after its biggest single day in September of 2019, when millions of people around the world, most of them young, took to the streets in New York City. Later on in this piece, he says, this movement needs to expand again. Campaigns draw their structure from the committed activists at the core, but they draw their power from the large numbers of less intensely engaged citizens that they can entice in for a little while. Victory for movements means somehow reaching into the broad middle and convincing people that they can play an important role, even if they do so just temporarily. Welcome, Bill McKibben.
Well, thank you so much. Melissa, Barbara, it's really a pleasure just to be able to say thank you publicly for all the work that y'all have done, and especially for this remarkable summer in Montana. I got to write a good deal about that trial as it was unfolding. And it was, as it unfolded, it was a really remarkable spectacle, because the testimony was so both moving and dynamic that it almost literally obliterated the other side of the case. I mean, I watched on Zoom for days as young people and the most eminent climate scientists and engineers in the country laid out in a way that's rarely happened before exactly the specifics of where we are and what it meant. And then I watched for a morning as the state of Montana tried feebly to begin to mount a defense and then just gave up and went home. I thought it was the most remarkable thing I'd ever seen. They paid their expert witness, Judith Curry, some huge sum of money and then they just said, forget it, this is not going to work. And they all but gave up, and it did not surprise me one bit when they lost a really important decision. Important for many reasons. We'll see how it plays out structurally over time, but truly important in helping everyone understand just where we are right now and what it means. And where we are right now is in an extremely difficult place. I'm glad that we won, that court case happened this summer, because this summer, in almost every other respect, was a terrifying moment. Rhonda and everybody else, I think, know this as well as anyone, but let me just say it. Those of us who lived through the summer of 2023 in the Northern Hemisphere lived through things that no human being have ever lived through before. The climate scientists told us that those stretch of days and really weeks in late June and the first part of July were the hottest weather ever recorded on this planet. Now, those records only go back 200 years or so, but we have proxy records, tree rings, ice cores, that extend that record much further back. And what they said was that it's been at least 125,000 years on this earth since it's been this warm, and maybe at least 1,000,000 years. That means that nobody that we really think of as a fellow human, certainly no human society, has ever endured the kind of weather that we've seen and are continuing to see. September turns out to be even farther off the charts in comparison with other Septembers than June and July. It looks like we may pass, at least temporarily, that 1.5 degree mark sometime around November. And with it has come the extraordinary scenes of fires on a scale we've never seen before. In Canada, the fires there have produced more carbon, twice as much as all the flying, driving, heating, cooking, cooling that goes on in Canada in the course of a year. These are feedback cycles now in a way we've never seen. The oceans are hotter than we've ever seen them. We learned yesterday about the really amazing devastation of reefs around the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. It's producing storms in a scale we've never seen. Warm air holds more water vapor than cold, setting up record rainfalls. Here in Vermont, where I live, we had flooding like we've never seen. A neighbor a quarter mile away lost his house to a landslide. We're comparatively lucky because, in Libya last week, 10,000 people lost their lives when record rainfalls broke 2 dams and basically washed a big city out to sea. We're in extraordinary trouble, and we have very short time to turn it around. This is a time test, and the scientists have told us exactly what needs to happen. That we have to cut emissions in half by 2030 to have some hope of reaching those climate targets we set in Paris in 2015. By my watch, 2030 is 6 years and 3 months away. So we better get cracking. And that leads to the question of who better get cracking. So far, young people have been doing an extraordinary amount of the work in this fight. I started 350.org. I was in my 40s, but my 7 collaborators were in their teens. They were students here at Middlebury College when we started 350.org, which was the first effort at a global grassroots climate campaign. It's gone well. We've organized 20,000 demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea. We kind of helped spearhead the fight against the Keystone Pipeline, one of the few big defeats that big oil's taken. We launched this fossil fuel divestment campaign that's now at $40 trillion in portfolios and endowments that have broken ties with oil and coal and gas. But the biggest dividend from that divestment campaign was all the young people who went on to do other things, because we were fighting in colleges around the world, and most of them now have divested. Harvard and Princeton and the University of California and Oxford and Cambridge and the University of Michigan and 1,000 more. But the young people who did that work when they graduated wanted to keep going. So they formed the Sunrise Movement, who brought us the Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal watered down an awful lot in the congressional sausage-making machine, was what became the IRA. If it hadn't been for those kids, we wouldn't have gotten it. And of course, about Greta Thunberg, and one of my favorite people to work with on planet Earth. I really adore her. But she would be the first to say there are 10,000 Gretas, young people around the world, and they have 10 million followers. That's how many people were out on school strike in September 2019. So young people have been doing their job, as exemplified by that Montana lawsuit and by its federal equivalent, Juliana v. US. I heard, however, one too many people explain to me over the years that it was up to the next generation to solve these problems, which seems A, ignoble, they didn't cause it, and B, highly impractical, because by themselves, young people, for all their energy, intelligence, idealism, lack the structural power to make change on the scale that we need in the time that we have by themselves. Structural power lies elsewhere, and a lot of it, as it turns out, lies with those of us of a certain age, which is why we started Third Act a couple of years ago. There are 70 million Americans over the age of 60 in this country. That's a lot. It's the population of France. But multiply it by some factor, because we punch above our weight politically. We all vote. There is no known way to stop old people from voting. Okay. Not only that, we ended up with most of the money. We got, for fair or not, we got about 70% of the country's financial assets. So if you want to mess with Washington or you want to mess with Wall Street, and I'd like to mess with both, then you need some people with hairlines like mine engaged in this fight. The reason that no one had tried to do this kind of organizing before, the reason why this is a wide open field, is because political scientists firmly believe that people become more conservative as they age. There may have been some truth to that at some point. I don't know. I mean, you get more stuff, maybe you become more protective of it. But I don't think it's particularly true for this generation of older people. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, in your first act, you were around for that period of epic social and cultural and political transformation of the 1960s and the 1970s, the time when we started taking women seriously in public life, the apex of the civil rights movement. The first Earth Day, when 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, marched on the same day, the biggest demonstration in American history. If you have any doubt about the power of those days, look at the things that the retrograde Supreme Court took on in their rampage over the last couple of years. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Gun Control Act of 1968, the Clean Air Act of 1971, and Roe v. Wade 1973. These are things that people my age got to live under the protection of their whole lives. And so it makes sense that they would want to try and defend them. And that's why Third Act has grown so explosively in the 2 years that it's been around. We now have many, many tens of thousands of volunteers all across the country. I just helped inaugurate the Maryland chapter tonight, one of the last states we have a statewide chapter now. And those volunteers are doing amazing things on the kind of twin crises of climate and democracy. They've registered so many thousands of people to vote. Young people in particular. We've been running this campaign called Senior to Senior, where older people write high school seniors letters telling them how voting is meant to them and helping them get registered. Because it turns out that only about 10% of high school seniors manage to register for the first election in which they're eligible. But if you can get them to register, then they vote in high numbers and start getting in the habit. And those letters were fun for people to write, look back, think about over their lives. I've been in retirement. I was in a retirement community not long ago. And after I talked, they took me up to the assisted living part. And there was a 97-year-old woman there. She couldn't leave her bed, but she was writing 15 letters a day because she still wanted to have some effect on the world around her. And they were fun for the people who were getting them. It turns out that if you're 17, there's a reasonable chance you might never have hardly ever gotten an actual letter before in your life. You got a lot of, snapgrams and Instachats and things, but someone actually sitting down with a pen and paper is a kind of novel communications technology. It's been really fun to see how willing people are to get outside their comfort zone. In March, we staged what was the first big national climate action since the pandemic. We had 100 demonstrations in 100 cities taking on the four big banks, Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, that are the four biggest funders to the fossil fuel industry. And we, well, it was a great day, and it was remarkably militant. I was in DC where we closed down branches of those banks for the afternoon. We've reached the age where sitting in, if it means sprawling on the sidewalk for 4 or 5 hours at a time, is a less attractive proposition than it might once have been. So instead, we scoured all the Goodwill stores and stuff in the area and found every rocking chair we could, and we've locked down those banks with hundreds of rocking chairs. The New York Times the next day called it the Rocking Chair Rebellion. If nothing else, it was the most comfortable sit-in I ever took part in, and that's how I'm going to do it from now on. But it was great, and it opened up a new and important front in this work, and there are many, many, many more of those fronts that need to be opened, and many, many more people that need to be reached. This is an audience, a demographic of 70 million people that basically no one's ever tried to organize before for progressive ends. The last real attempt was in the 1970s with a group called the Gray Panthers, and they were terrific, but that was a long time ago. And so it's been really interesting to see all the things that people bring to the table. It's kind of evenly divided between people who've been doing this their whole lives. One of my favorite, one of our board members and one of my favorite colleagues is a woman named Heather Booth, who went south in 1963 to register voters as part of Freedom Summer, who founded what's called the Jane Collective that provided abortion services across America before Roe v. Wade, on and on and on. And she's kept at it her whole life, doing remarkable, remarkable things. And it's evenly divided between people like that and people who've never done anything like this before in their lives and are learning how to build and organize movements with enormous power. It's really, really moving, is what I'm trying to say, to watch that come together and to watch them figure out how to back up young people in the work that they're doing. We started this banks work because the Fridays for the Future chapters in the States said, we want to go to work on these banks that are the biggest funders of the fossil fuel industry, but most of us are too young to have a credit card. We don't have checking accounts. Can you help? And we were like, yeah, we're good at checking accounts. That's our thing. The first demonstration that we did was in Boston, and we were outside the Chase Bank, and there were hundreds of high school kids, because there always are, and they are somewhat sprier, so they're out in front of the march. But at the back of the march, there was a big crowd of older people. We had a banner that said, "Fossils against fossil fuels." First rule of this work is don't take yourself overly seriously if you can help it. It was really good for the young people who were there to see older people backing them up, because I think that an awful lot of younger people at the moment feel as if they've been more or less abandoned by older generations. Like, we got the cream of the crop, you guys do what you can, and that's not okay. And it's not smart either, because, well, look, if you're 20 right now, you have an obvious reason for being worried about climate. It's going to dominate your entire life, this crushing crisis. I'm going to be dead before the worst of it kicks in, but I have my own reasons. When you're younger, you don't think a lot about legacy. But once you're a little nearer the exit than the entrance, it begins to dawn on you that the world you leave behind is your biggest, well, it is your biggest legacy, which just means what kind of world you've left for the people you love the most. And the world that we're leaving is a world that was worse than the one that we found. And we do not want to be one of the first generations to say that. And we do not need to be, because we can exercise power enough to make a difference in this fight. Not to stop global warming. Sadly, it is too late for that, but to stop it short of the point where it cuts civilization off at the knees. We have real possibilities. The work of engineers in the last 2 decades has dropped the price of renewable energy 90%. We live on a planet where the cheapest way to make power is to point a sheet of glass at the sun. That should allow us to make enormous progress fast, but only if we can break the power of the fossil fuel industry, and that demands organizing. Organizing by everyone. So we're really happy to be taking on this new experiment of figuring out how to organize older people. It's been so much fun to watch it happen. You've got people from Florida here today who are doing an unbelievable job, from Arizona. That makes sense, because those are the places where older people tend to congregate, although we've got quite a few everywhere, even up here in the woods in Vermont where I am. And you know, we will show up as best we can. We're building as fast as we can, and the more resources we have, the faster we'll be able to build. It's remarkable to watch it happen. Those of us who are volunteers in this work are, well, we're always moved by seeing more and more people step up to be a part of it. So such thanks to this community for welcoming us in. Such thanks to the people at the Western Environmental Law Center for the work that they're doing, because it's incredibly important. And this summer in Montana, if you haven't read the transcripts of this court case, go do it, because you'll get a crash course in climate science, but also a crash course in intergenerational morality. And just such thanks to everybody who's stepping up, including all my colleagues at Third Act. I'm going to stop there. I know that you have breakouts and things to get to, and I actually have to, in a few minutes, go do another Zoom. But if there are questions or things that I can answer, I'll do it. But mostly just many, many, many thanks.
Yes, Bill, thank you so much. I wanted to kick off the questions, and then I want to open it up to anybody else if you want to put it in chat or raise your hand. But Bill, so what we're hoping to do with these power hours is to invite people to get involved. So what few things would you suggest that they do? What are the most, the biggest that you might suggest that we take action on?
Well, so first thing is, come join us at thirdact.org. We're supposedly for people over 60, but we don't really check IDs, so whatever. And we're actually having our big monthly big national Zoom call on Thursday night. Gina McCarthy is joining us to talk about how to get news out about the IRA all over the country, and how to sort of make it implemented. We're doing a number of fights. This bank fight is continuing. And in fact, now the next phase of it will be a big campaign to convince Costco, a company we actually like a good deal, to stop using Citibank for their credit cards, because it's driving up their carbon emissions extraordinarily. We're also going to be taking on, as best we can, this is what I've been writing about in the last few weeks in the New Yorker and in my newsletter, this incredible issue around liquefied natural gas and its build out. This is the last big gasp of the fossil fuel industry. And if we let it happen, it will undermine all our climate goals. Just one of these LNG terminals they want to build in Louisiana, the one I was writing about in the New Yorker last week, called CP2, will have 20 times the greenhouse gas emissions associated over its lifetime with that grotesque willow project in Alaska that we all worked hard and lost on earlier this year. This one's 20 times the greenhouse gas emissions. If they build it out, the LNG export business, the way that they're talking about now, then emissions from America, if you count those as ours, as you should, will not have budged at all from 2005. Just because it's being burnt somewhere else doesn't mean it's not our problem. That stuff has to stay in the ground if we're going to have any chance. So we're going to be doing that. It's going to be truthfully tricky because at the same time, we have to figure out over the next year how to make sure we don't elect Donald Trump president of the United States again. Because if we do, well, we're not going to be making any progress on climate at all. He'll gut everything that the Biden administration has done, which is not negligible, and we'll be living in a gross dictatorship. So it's going to be a hard line to figure out how to push them at the same time as we figure out how to prop them up. And it's kind of going to be, it's going to take some doing, but I think we can do it. And it's actually one of those places where older people may have some advantage, because probably we're a little more used to the give and take of decision making than people who are, for good reason, sick and tired of watching us move too slowly. So
Right.
these are some of the
So,
things.
so move your money if you have the opportunity to do that. Gabe, I believe that you had your hand up. Take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Yeah, you mentioned you have a newsletter.
Yes.
Where can someone go to find that?
It's free, and it's called The Crucial Years, and it's at Substack, and it's fun. I mostly write for the New Yorker, where I've worked it one way or another since I was 21, my first job out of college. But there are times when it's fun to just be very uninhibited, and that's what sort of Substack allows you to completely be. And so it's a good venue for organizing, and probably because it's free, it's got an awful lot of subscribers now.
That's great. Well, Gabe is part of the University of Cincinnati, and he's a part of Net Impact chapter there. So he's already very involved. I see that Trey and I believe somebody else had their hand up.
Is it all right to follow up to that question first?
Real quick, because we've got limited time.
Okay, yeah. So when you want to create change with the banks, are you looking to focus on like the consumer side and like consumer avoidance, or are you looking to get regulations put in place or like corporate avoidance?
Both. There's not, this is the capital in capitalism. These guys are so big that the odds of that taking out your checking, I don't know, maybe your checking account is enormous, but odds are they won't notice as it goes out by itself. But it's a powerful and effective tool to be organizing people to take these places on. We got a big win last week. Third Actors poured 6,000 letters into the governor of California, asking him to sign SB 253. That forces all the big companies to follow all their carbon emissions, including the ones that come from their financial arrangements. And that means that places like Apple will have to report 60% of Apple's carbon emissions come from the cash they keep in banks. So if they're actually going to go net zero, as they keep promising they're going to, then they're going to have to deal with their financial. And, Tim Cook standing up to Chase Bank is a big deal. If the head of Apple sits down with the head of Chase and says, "Hey, bro, I cannot do this net zero thing I've been talking about if you keep handing cash to Exxon." Well, then that forces them to choose, and I bet they choose Apple, not Exxon. So we got to, you build movements to leverage power. The most important thing an individual can do at any moment is not be an individual. We're not going to solve this one Tesla at a time. It's to be less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to make the change we need.
Great. Trey?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. McKibben, for taking the time. I wanted to ask if you had to give one piece of advice to an active young climate organizer such as myself, that's in the middle of a university fossil fuel divestment campaign.
Well, I think that at this point, the biggest question to ask now is like, what university are you at, Trey?
University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign.
Got it.
Yeah.
You got to ask them, what is it you guys know that, the people at Harvard, Cambridge, University of California, University of Michigan, whatever, don't know? Because they all divested. They all did it because they know it's going to make them money to divest. The fossil fuel industry has been underperforming for a long time. And they're doing it because they know that young people are demanding this. Who's going to, in the end, come to school at the places that are still driving the climate crisis? But here's another one that I've used with a lot of university boards of trustees, and they never really have an answer. We all know now from great investigative reporting that the fossil fuel industry knew everything there was to know about climate change 30 years ago and then systematically lied about it for decades, preventing action. That's why California sued them last week in what's going to be a huge, huge important. Well, universities are places, the last places really, that even pretend to take intellectual honesty seriously. If you or some professor just up and up lied about things that you knew, you'd get booted out, and rightly so. So it's incongruous at best to let people who have done devastatingly dishonest things continue to be important presence on a college campus. All universities, including Champaign-Urbana, if you go to their website, they have all this stuff about how they're greening their dorms or their dining halls, whatever. That's terrific. But just keep reminding them that the endowment is exactly as much a part of the university as the gymnasium. You can't do this by halves. And the good news is it's the easiest possible part to change. All you have to do is sell a few stocks and buy a few other ones. You don't actually even have to go change any light bulbs, just tell your investment manager what the hell to do.
Bill, I think we have two other questions before we let you go, because we know we want to give you a little bit of a rest, and then we'll pivot to questions to Barbara and Melissa. So Nancy Jacks asks, fossil fuel companies are effectively using bonds as a backdoor for raising money. This is HSBC and the infamous Deutsche Bank and Barclays, among others. What can we do to help stop this? And then I should add the fourth one is, what other banks should we go to?
Sure. There's a lot of work going on on those banks in particular, and a lot of it's happening with great European campaigners who are all close in touch with HSBC, Barclays, others. There's a lot of fronts on this financial work. It's not just banks. It's also the huge investment houses, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and it's also the insurance industry, which is the biggest pool of capital in the world, and heavily invested in fossil fuel, despite the fact that it's also the insurance industry that understands more deeply than anyone else exactly what trouble we're in, because they have mountains of actuarial data about flood and fire and so on and so forth. So we push on all fronts. And we're part of effective coalitions. I helped found something called Stop the Money Pipeline a few years ago. It's the kind of coordinating center for a lot of this work, and everyone should be a part of that. Third Act certainly is, we're a kind of leading component of it and trying on all these fronts. There are banks that are fossil free. On the East Coast, Amalgamated Bank, headquartered in New York, America's only labor bank. On the West Coast, Beneficial State. There's several web-based banks that do good stuff. Your local credit union or local bank is probably not deeply involved in the fossil fuel industry either. So those are good places, but just to repeat, our job is not to perfect ourselves by making sure that, we're our own. I'd much rather continue to figure out how to put huge pressure on Chase and Citi and Wells Fargo and Bank of America to change, because if they change, the results would be remarkable. If tomorrow Citi said, we're no longer lending to the fossil fuel industry for expansion of their business, that would be felt on every stock market in America, in the world, in a matter of hours. It would be global and it would be swift. So the fight is hard. This is the capital in capitalism, but the prize is big. So keep it up. Keep up. Work on all fronts, including the legal. Thank heaven for the work that environmental lawyers are doing. And this is gaining momentum. That California lawsuit is a big deal. Keep it up on the political organizing front, because we've got to elect people who care about this stuff. And just as important, we've got to defeat people who are our enemies on this work. Keep it up on every possible front. And we got to do it with all kinds of people. Young people, I think, are pretty fully engaged. So make sure to tell your parents and your grandparents to get their act in gear on this stuff. We've got now the vehicles for them to do it at Third Act, and we can welcome and absorb and use their energy that they bring. So it'll be, look, this isn't going to go on forever. This fight's going to be decided in the next 5 or 6 years, I think. An awful lot of that's we're running out of runway here. So throw down now with everything you got, and we'll see where we are. And so many thanks to everyone engaged in this fight.
Thanks, Bill. Everybody take your mute off, and let's give him a round of applause for your decades of service to this important issue.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
God
you.
bless.
We're going to pivot to Barbara and Melissa to take a couple questions from them.
All right, so I am also a part of the same organization that Trey is here at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and we are currently in the works working on an addendum to an Illinois law that's already in place, but basically just working on divesting once again the university. So as you guys worked with a lot of youths to get your law passed, how would you recommend that we go forward with that? Like specifically, like interacting with, hopefully not being rude, but like older people, how would you recommend that we sort of tailor our argument to get it across to them?
That's a great question, Avery. Melissa and I are both have children, so I feel like we're pretty adept at communicating with young people. And maybe my daughter wouldn't agree, but I mean, I think it really is kind of circumstance specific, but I just think that, folks like, I mean, I'll speak for myself, older folks, middle-aged folks, like really do, I just get so much inspiration from the energy that I see in young people, especially just organizing and just really standing up for what they believe in. And I really think that, I mean, this is not super specific, but just showing up and knowing that you're being heard and that your voice matters, it really is inspiring to those of us who, do this work for a living and who have done this work for a long time. So I just, it's not super specific, but I think you're all doing a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Somebody had asked, and I'm also interested in knowing, they said, how do we get a copy of the transcript from the Montana trial? How do you access it? As Bill recommended, we read it.
I think probably the best avenue to get a transcript of the trial would be to reach out to Our Children's Trust, which is the other law firm that was representing the 16 youth plaintiffs. They're the ones who have the full transcript and the ability to share it. Barbara, are you aware of any public copies right now? Okay, I will drop an address in the chat.
Great. For the UI students, can you engage Governor Pritzker? Oh, everyone's just giving folks all kinds of ideas. So that's great. I'm going to share just a couple more things, and then we're going to send you into breakout. So great to have the University of Illinois. There's 3 of you. That's super awesome for all of you to be here. Our next Power Hour, which is coming up Monday, and that will be our last one, is on climate justice. So we're going to be joined by 2 representatives from the Climate Justice Alliance, and I highly encourage you to join us for all kinds of important insights from Monica Atkins and Mark Chavez. So that will be same time, but on Monday of next week, which is the final week of Earth Gives Day. I wanted to thank Bill and Melissa and Barbara, everybody at the Western Environmental Law Center for all of your great work and preparation, not only for tonight, but for all the things that you do and all the amazing Third Act chapters and 350 groups that are here today as well. Tomorrow, as far as Earth Gives Day goes, we are conducting a match. So starting at 11 a.m. Pacific time, anyone who gives $75 or more, that amount will be matched for any nonprofit that you give it to for the first 15 donors. Since we've also got a great group, I can't be remiss to invite you all to think about creating a fundraiser off of a nonprofit's page. The students can do it, everyone can do it. You would just find one of the nonprofits that you want to raise money for, and up at the top is going to have a button that says fundraiser. You click on it and just follow the steps. It basically just needs your name and email. You can put your own pictures up there and then share that unique link out with your friends and family and colleagues all the way through October 5th, because we're trying to drive resources to these groups that have boots on the ground and boats in the ocean, are doing a lot for us while we take advantage of clean air and water and land and wildlife protections and all those kinds of things. There are 97 amazing groups like Blue Scholars Initiative and Bark that protects Mount Hood, and Forest Park Conservancy and the Northern Colorado Wildlife Center, and so many others working in STEM and education and recycling and upcycling done the right way, thinking about zero waste and advancing that kind of thing, as well as legal organizations like WELP, who are out there advocating and fighting the good fight in courtrooms. So we highly suggest that you go seek them out. So continue to do that until October 5th. And the importance of this year is because we need to expand this into the next years to continue to drive resources. And next year is especially a big year, obviously, leading into 2024. We specifically positioned Earth Gives Day in early October because where you give your money, your volunteer time, where you use your voice and your vote is critically important. And I think, like Bill said, this next vote is, in fact, a climate vote. So special thanks to the university students. Hopefully, we've got you all assigned to breakouts. We're going to send you off to breakout groups. You don't need to come back. You're going to spend some time in your breakouts, break up whenever you feel ready. And you're going to basically do 3 things. So you're going to introduce yourselves. You're going to share what was your biggest takeaway or learning from tonight's talk. And the third thing is, what are you going to commit to do? So we want to get everybody on record with a commitment, and anyone who is facilitating and scribbling down those commitments, I would love you to email them back so we can share them out to other folks. So again, thank you all for joining us. And now my colleague Luann, thank you so much for all that you've done to help me out. We're going to send you out to breakout groups so you can get to know one another and answer those questions.